What's your take on copycats?
I don't mind copycats.
Do you need an original idea to start a business? Not necessarily. I just sat down with Noor Sweid, who pulled off her first billion-dollar IPO before she was even 30. Noor is now a venture capitalist who you may have seen on Shark Tank or on social media, where she shares tips for entrepreneurs and investors. In my interview with her, I asked her to break down how she makes money and what that means for founders trying to get her attention.
I don't care that you've made $100 million. I need this to hit $1 billion.
Her hallmark as an investor is to help local companies go global. The reason I think you should take her advice is that she has founded and scaled up companies herself. That's rare in the VC world in emerging markets. Right now, as an investor, her strategy is to beware of an AI bubble. Consider instead another technology that's a much better buy. Noor, you're a shark on Shark Tank. We find ourselves, I mean, we've known each other for years, and we find ourselves here kind of bridging between media and the business world. I'm curious as to your journey. I know when I was asked to do this show, my first reaction was no. But I'm curious as to your journey, kind of stepping outside of the the day-to-day work to be more in the media side of things.
Shark Tank was my first foray into media with season 1. It's a privilege and honor to have been invited, and I was very, very nervous. And it was one of my kids, my middle child, Shad, who was like, "Mom, you're always telling us to go outside our comfort zone and try new things. And this is an opportunity in Arabic to learn and share and listen to pitches." And so the confidence of one of my kids and me allowed me to really take that step. And his argument was, I learned so much from Shark Tank. He's kind of a natural entrepreneur. So his argument was, this is where I learn, this is what inspires me. Hearing these stories and these pitches and these judges and these questions teaches me more than school. And you always talk about teaching and people learning, and this is an opportunity. So that was really what got me to say, yes, I'm going to do this. It's exciting and scary, but I can. And then from there, it just kind of spiraled.
Yep. So I can relate, actually, when I told my children about what I was going to be doing and showed my eldest, Sidra, some of the early cuts and what I was doing. They have in school this WWW, what went well, and EBI, even better if. So I pushed I pushed my kids to give me the WWW, EBI, and kind of also to show them, what, your dad's also putting himself out there and trying new things, and that's really important as we kind of raise our kids. Let's talk about the tech landscape and the VC landscape here in the GCC. I remember when we were going out to raise capital for NEMSHI back in, this would be 2012, which we're trying to raise around, it ended up being $20 million, knocked on a bunch of doors, and the entire round ended up being US and European investors. It's changed quite a bit since then. Would love to hear about the state of the funding ecosystem today and the role that your firm, Global Ventures, is playing in that.
So when I started the firm just almost 7 years ago, the ecosystem had $400 million of funding. I'll define the ecosystem. It's all of MENA. It's about 400 million people. We don't think of it as one economic bloc, but we do think of it as one geography, right? That's a very small number. It was less than 0.02% of the GDP. When you compare that with, for example, Europe is at 0.6% of their GDP. The US is at 0.8% of their GDP. So we're not talking about 2 or 3 times more. We're talking substantial multiples more. So that $400 million 7 years ago, last year sat at $2.6 billion. So last year we have $2.6 billion of funding across MENA, all deals, all year. It's still a very small number.
Yeah, there's some funds that are that big, exactly.
Exactly. There are some rounds that are that big.
But it's like from a global perspective.
If you think of Revolut as a $45 billion company with a $10 billion round. So our ecosystem, all deals, all years, $2.6 billion. We're very proud of ourselves. It is still young.
Yeah.
46% of that funding came from international investors. So you can read that as, wow, they have so much faith in the region, they see so much opportunity in the region, they're excited about the growth. You can also read that as, why is the region not doing more then? So, but it's growing. So optimistic about the future, it's grown a lot. There are about 24 funds in the region or firms that actively deploy. I chair the Middle East VC Association, so we see everyone and we do try to collaborate. The UAE offers different opportunities for investment than Saudi, which is different to Egypt. So each country has its nuances, but it does operate as one market.
And we were so excited. I remember, I mean, there's the first phase, let's say, of the global players looking to here. So, the Yahoo deal back, when acquired Maktub out here, and then Amazon coming in acquiring Souq, Uber coming in to acquire Careem. That was kind of a phase of like from global to, let's say, regional here. And now we're starting to see, regional companies going out to the world and taking their wares. I mean, the one that comes to mind on our end is, one of the very first companies that set up at Astrolabs, this is like a decade ago, was Fresha. Nick and Will set up a two-person company with a vision to revolutionize really the way that spa and salon bookings were done across this region. And you fast forward to today, they're now HQ'd in London. They have $185 million of funding. It's like they're across Europe, US, Canada, Australia, et cetera. It's really a story of a company that's really changed the business model and went global. And because of the timing, they headquartered out in London. I wonder if it were today, if that would be the case. What's your favorite story of a company from here going global?
So the one that's most recent, let's do that. So Enhance Fitness, company based in Dubai. The founder, Tariq Munir, formerly the CEO of Deezer in the region. So he set up a personal training system where, and we like B2B and SaaS solutions as global ventures. So when he first approached us, I said, okay, explain. So he said, gyms have a huge lost opportunity because they don't manage their PTs well. So he wanted to go into gyms and say, I will manage your PTs for you.
Okay.
I have a scheduling software, and I'm gonna figure this out. I'll put the PTs on my payroll. I'm gonna send them in with people. And then he went to hotels and said, you guys have gyms that are underutilized most of the day. If I send you a customer and a PT and you take a revenue share, does that work? And then he set up the marketplace side for customers like me that could say, go on an app and say, okay, I'm gonna book a trainer, 10 sessions. I want something within a 2-kilometer radius of me or whatever it is. And it'll send me to a gym or a hotel or whatever they've contracted with without me having the membership.
So making access to personal trainers much easier.
Much easier, much more affordable, helping gyms optimize their space and their PTs, and giving hotels an incremental income. The first year revenues were $1 million. The next year were 5. The next year were 12.
Wow.
This year it's over 20.
At what point did you get in?
Right at the beginning.
Wow.
So he is now rolled out with Crunch in the US. 40 gyms this year, another 200 next year. UFC, Life, they're all waiting. So this is now an international company. They're expanding into Europe, but the US launch is done.
So question on this though, like on personal training and even optimizing personal trainers, surely there were other players or people who were thinking about this space. Were they the first in the world to do this? I mean, how were they able to capture like a US market from here? What do you think was the special sauce? Is the idea?
I think it was the idea, but also the application, the dashboard, the tech, all of it is globally competitive. And I think that this is one of our challenges in the MENA region, is this mindset of whatever someone's doing here, there's gotta be someone in San Francisco doing it better, right? And the answer is no. That's not necessarily true.
Not necessarily that they're doing it better, but my question is like, has the likelihood that it's absolutely first person in the world to think of an idea versus somebody who's
it's the first person in the world to think of an idea in this way and to execute it
the best.
Because you can think of an idea,
yeah,
right, but to then apply it in a certain way and to execute and to commercialize it, that's huge.
Different thing. So on this topic, they can be called copycats. The companies which will take a business model that already exists somewhere else and then apply it to a market, particularly emerging ones, right? So I remember even when we were launching Nemshi, I mean, there was Zappos. I mean, it's like not, we didn't come up with the idea of selling fashion online. It already existed. But it kind of also, to call it a copycat really underplays the amount of innovation that happens under the surface, right? So, here, for instance, the example was the amount of work we needed to do on the operations side, all the cash on delivery, the working with the shippers, all the stuff that you had to build systems and processes to factor for local realities that didn't exist maybe where these things launched. What's your take on, why we see so many of let's say replicated models, and do you think that that's healthy? Do you think that it's something we should get away from? What's your take on copycats?
I don't mind copycats,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I don't love them, but I reckon that there's space in the market, and I think founders get excited about opportunities that have worked elsewhere. So at Global Ventures, half our portfolio is copycats.
Do you call them that to their face?
No, half our portfolio are emulators,
okay.
and half are innovators.
Sure.
So that's how we think about it.
Okay.
The emulators we're very careful with. So a great example is Tabby, right? Which is a business model that may or may not have worked elsewhere.
Sure. My co-founder Hassam from
Your
Nemshi
co-founder
days.
Hassam.
Yeah.
So we are in Tabby very early. And the principle is the fundamentals in the region where credit does not exist, where digital payments aren't as easy, actually allow for a successful company in the BNPL space, whereas abroad, credit was a very competitive landscape, and BNPL failed for many, right? And it was very difficult for others. Here, this is an EBITDA positive company with high growth, worth billions right now, where others struggled. So sometimes you think of the copycat or emulator concept, and you say, wait, this model worked elsewhere, it may not work here unless you actually change the fundamentals because of regional nuances. Or you can say, this company or this business model has failed elsewhere, but serves a huge market need here.
Interesting.
And so you have to think about it both ways.
And how do you think about regulatory risk? Because, I mean, there's a lot of operating here has its pluses and minuses. There's obviously, there is a lot of PR about what you can do and how the opportunities are in a market like the Gulf. And then there's a reality of operating, and some of the business models and activities are more challenging to get licensed or to get off of the ground. Do you see those types of regulated spaces as like opportunity, or are you kind of worried about them and try to stay away from ones that are overly regulated?
I think that the regulators in the region are as business friendly as they come. If I want to sit and compare to regulators in Europe or the US and how complex things can get there, you're not talking about forward-thinking governments abroad. Right? So I think when it comes to the region, the regulators and the leadership they're always very clear. This is the mission. This is what's allowed. If you're in private sector and innovating, come have a conversation with us because we would like the regulation to make sense. And the best example of that is VARA. So this was, as the UAE, the first country to have a digital asset regulator, way ahead of everyone else. So that to me was the proof that as far as they can, the regulators here say, okay, new technology, new business opportunities, how do we work with private sector to enable this?
And you've seen it from the inside. I mean, you were the chief investment officer, right? CIO at Dubai Future Foundation.
Yes.
And Dubai is a very unique environment in many ways. What do you think it is about Dubai, and would you recommend a entrepreneur or somebody from other places around the world that might not even be from the region to actually come to a place like this in order to start a company?
I would. I think it's a very forward-looking environment. I mean, so this is actually what I write about in my book. So the book, Coming of Age, is about the region's coming of age. So it talks about how the region has the world's youngest population, half the population is under 30, and how digital innovation and entrepreneurship are really changing the face of this part of the world, and how government or the region itself, regulators, are forward-looking, working with private sector. You can set up any company here. So we explore and we talk to 30 different founders for this book and talk from Hussam, from Tabby, and his experience at Namshi, comparing them, Ronaldo from Souk, Mudassir and Magnus, the founders of Kareem. So we've talked to the originals, if you will, and how it was back then building companies. Then we talked to the fintechs. So we talked to 4 fintech founders and how they found setting up in the region and why the region made sense for them and how they're changing the landscape of what financial inclusion looks like, what savings looks like, what credit looks like. We do the same with healthcare. So the health tech founders and what that looked like for them. And then we do the same with education. So 4 founders that are all in ed tech. So this part of the world has the highest percentage of the total population still in school. And it's double the percentage of Europe or other markets.
Interesting.
So when we think about what does ed tech mean to us, it really shapes the future very differently. So when we think about the enablement of the populations, given some of the lack of legacy infrastructure, using technology and the way that regulators embrace that and collaborate with it, it's not slight, it's tremendous. And what that means now in things like food security. So actually food security is a great example. One of the companies that we like is called Iris. And they've innovated out of the region, not originally from the region. One British, one American founder. And they were at KAUST, King Abdullah University, Science and Technology. And they found a way to allow any indoor farming to reduce energy consumption by up to 90%. So they found a way that, by studying the cactus plant, they found a way that they could desalinate water differently, not by desalinating, but by processing it. And they started building this, now based in the UAE, exporting to 15 markets, including the US, 14 countries across Europe and Asia. So you start to take a look and you say, this is technology that was created here, the patents are here, it was built here. Why? Because of the acute need of food security. So people here are thinking about food security. We still import 85% of our food. How do you get to a point where agri-tech enables that?
So when we talk about Dubai, it's also important to remember that it's not just the latest trend of technology companies, that this kind of spirit has been here for a long time. Even one of the most famous companies that come out of here, Emirates Airline, which I looked at in my research actually for my PhD, the founding story is just an incredible startup. I mean, it's like $10 million of seed capital, a couple of leased planes from Pakistan. The call sign is EK because it was Emirates to Karachi. And it just started as a startup that had a big dream. And I think that a lot of ways it's kind of part and parcel of the Dubai story. And now we're seeing it in the next generation of technologies and founders. What do you think this region is particularly well suited for in terms of if you were going to start a company now here, what spaces are you most excited about?
So I've talked about agri-tech and food security, and I think that's a game changer for the next 5 to 10 years. I think this region will solve a lot of it because of the need. I also think supply chain tech is just paramount at this point in time. And by that, I go all the way from manufacturing to last mile. And I think that we sitting in Dubai, sitting in the region, will reinvent everything. So from manufacturing, we've already seen companies like Imensa that do additive manufacturing or 3D printing for oil and gas industry, spare parts, as well as now new parts. And now they've expanded into Europe. They're working with the maritime industry. Why? Because we did not have legacy infrastructure or incumbents here in manufacturing. So they were able to innovate. If they had tried to do the same thing abroad, there would have been all the incumbents stopping them.
Competition, et cetera.
Competition, people saying, why would you take the risk on a 3D printed part when you can have
when it already exists?
When it already exists, we're onshore, nearshore. But because of supply chain disruption, this part of the world had to start thinking differently.
It's interesting in that like the weaknesses actually could
historically are the opportunities of the future. All the way to last mile logistics. If you think of last mile logistics, this is one of the first parts of the world to have drone deliveries, commercial, right? But really 400 kilo payloads on commercial drones. And if you think about road infrastructure, in many parts of the world, it doesn't exist. If you think about third-party logistics solutions, now we have fourth-party logistics solutions. So you start to think just about lack of road infrastructure means that drones are a better solution than old diesel trucks on rickety roads or lack of roads, right? In emerging markets. Where is that likely to be developed? Somewhere nearby that understands the problem and has the ability to create a solution. So you end up in the UAE. So in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, we have commercial drones. We don't see them much, but we have them far ahead of where Europe and the US have them, maybe not as sophisticated as China. But supply chain from manufacturing all the way to last mile is where I see the next 5 or 10 years, this part of the world really bringing in solutions.
I'd love to hear from you on how you make money. So how does the VC fund itself make money?
Our investors pool their capital into the fund. We charge a percentage of that capital to keep the lights on, right? Find deals, source deals, work with founders, create value for founders.
Typically, that's what kind of percent?
So typically it's 2%.
About
so
2%.
2% of committed capital for the investment period, which is about 4 years.
Sure. So people pool, they put money in for a 4-year time period. 2% goes to run the fund.
People put money in for a 10-year time period. The first 4 years, we're allowed to invest. The subsequent 6 years, the job is to grow and exit the companies. So usually you get paid about 2% as a fund manager for those 4 years, and then it reduces down to 1% over the subsequent years. So the first 4 years, you're really looking for deals, which companies, how do you think they'll materialize,
Right.
can the founder grow it? But it's a 10-year relationship with the investors.
And you're not in it for the 2%.
And you're not in it for the 2% because that really barely keeps the lights on. So then subsequently, as you have exits,
Yeah.
you give the investors back their money. Once they've hit their full money returned, which is what we call the European waterfall, then we take 20% and they take 80% of what we make over and beyond that.
Sure. So you have to first return the full amount of the fund,
Yes.
and then any gravy on top, you're
We
going to
take
split
20, they take
20-80. You know, one of the topics I would love to pick your brain on is alignment between, you know, fund interest and founder interests, right? So a founder may be in a situation where they built a company and could exit making like personally some millions of dollars, maybe $5-10 million personally, which is like life changing for most humans, right? But not needle moving for a fund. So have you encountered this type of attention before within your own portfolio? And what do you think about that kind of potential misalignment between, you know, founders and funds?
So we have not encountered it. If one of our founders is making $10 million, it probably means we've done really well. Given that I'm not looking for one company to return the fund, I don't need to get that company to $1 billion valuation.
But how do you know it's not that company that will be the $1 billion valuation?
I don't need it to be at the $1 billion valuation. I need it to generate 10x.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're taking a look at multiples, if we're investing in a company at a $30 million valuation, right, and it hits a $300 million valuation,
Yeah.
great. We'll take a position to sell. So we just sold a stake 2 weeks ago in a company where our post-seed hit a 27 times for us, and our Series A hit 8 times. It's made the marks. The company is worth $800 million. That's wonderful. We got out. Because the question of, will it hit $5 billion and generate 5 times more for us without diluting us so much over what period of time that our IRRs actually get hurt, and we're giving money back to our investors 5 years from now, that's double today. No, thank you. That doesn't work for anyone.
Interesting. So it's interesting in that, yes, you're in the business of like taking the riskiest bets on the surface.
Yes.
But underneath the surface, it sounds very methodical.
We have a lot of risk management as a VC firm. And I think that consistency is imperative in the region because we're still young. Your average venture exit globally is $180 million. So once you take away all the failures, right? Your average venture exit's $180 million as a valuation.
Yeah.
So we need to keep that in mind. So if a company gets to 300 or 400 million and the founder's happy and we're happy, but if I'm a VC that's saying, I want one company to return the fund, and that founder gets the company $300 million and they've returned 30% of my fund with that, then to your earlier question, I'm conflicted. Then I'm telling the founder, I don't care that you've made $100 million. I need this to hit $1 billion so I can return my fund because I have 20 other failures.
Got to keep pushing on the gas.
So you have to keep pushing on the gas. You have to have the value creation mindset. You have to have a diversification mindset, and you have to have the mindset of, I want everyone to succeed really well, and I cannot bank on one company.
So I'd like you to put your investor hat on and help us out with advising our viewers who might be earlier on in their careers, have amassed like $10,000, let's say, of money to invest into an asset or into something. What would you recommend they look at today? And then I'm going to ask you to kind of rate that asset across risk, accessibility, and growth potential. So what do you think? What would you throw $10,000 into?
Today?
Yeah.
Not AI.
Not AI,
No.
okay.
I think it's overvalued.
Overvalued.
Maybe in 2 years once it comes back down.
Interesting.
So I think any area that has a lot of capital following it, the valuations tend to go up. It's great. You create a bubble. The bubble and the capital in the bubble builds infrastructure, and then a couple of years later, you're left with the infrastructure, which is amazing to build off of. So the same applies in real estate. Money flows in, bubbles, prices go down, but the real estate stays. Yeah. Blockchain, bubble, money flow in. It was great. And then ultimately you built out all this amazing infrastructure, all these different protocols, and then you come out of that.
Yep. And funded by a lot of the VCs, right?
Funded by a lot of the VCs.
Which are funded by the LPs. But what's today?
Now you say, I would actually invest in a company that's building something on the blockchain. Because the
infrastructure is there.
The infrastructure is there. And you're building real value add companies. So we have a few in the portfolio. We're seeing so many more opportunities. So the infrastructure there, it's very cheap.
Yeah.
Now how do you use it to build something meaningful?
Is this in supply chain or what?
Yeah. So one of them is in supply chain. So we did Malexi, which is a supply chain solution that uses blockchain and smart contracts to connect farmers in India and other emerging markets with wholesalers in the Gulf. Right? And smart contracts are very relevant there because you're removing the middlemen. And so how do you have trust if you don't have a middleman? Because that's what the is
on the
blockchain.
Interesting.
So those are the sorts of things. So today I would say take a look at blockchain-based solutions that are solving real problems. Because
and where do they find these? So let's say, they're not like a venture capitalist like yourself with access to private deals. So if you have the 10K, how do you access that?
There's angel networks, there's accelerators, incubators.
So you would actually put the money straight into a single company that's in this space?
Yes, $10,000, you're probably not going to be able to access a fund or pool your $10,000 with other people.
Get your friends.
Get your friends, pull together $100,000. And then if you want, go give it to a fund, right? And then they will put it in 20 companies and they will give you co-investment rights and you're able to participate more. Or find something that you are incredibly passionate about. Someone is building a company in a space you know well or you're passionate about or you want to learn and invest in that. That's what I would do.
I know that family is really important to you. And I know that you were involved in the family business early on. You were in your 20s, right? Getting involved with your father, leading up to the IPO, and taking a big role in the family business. Curious as to what you felt prepared you to be so involved so early in your career in a big priority like that.
So I started my career in Boston, consulting. Biotech, completely unrelated. Did my MBA, came back to Dubai consulting. And then it was gradual. So working with my father with the family business was never the plan. I helped put together a board, put independence. So leveraging my area of expertise, which was more strategy, a little bit of compliance, processes, governance, growth. So that strategy consulting that I'd done for years, bringing that to the table. I would never have been able to walk onto a project site and tell you what's going right or wrong. And I believe that the CEO of any company should always know how the money's made. So as long as I can't walk onto a site or look at a bid and say what's right and wrong, I have no business running the business, right? But I'm happy to guide on strategy, growth planning, all the stuff where I was strong and I knew where to add value. And I think when you enter the family business, it's important to keep that in mind. To say, this is my niche, this is where I'm strong. The rest, I'm happy if you ask me a question, but my advice is not worth much. And I think that's important for life. I think when people get in the family business, sometimes they want to be involved with everything, and that can create friction.
You had the opportunity to take your family company public,
Yes.
and in over a $1 billion IPO. But part of that was also expanding the company from here to the rest of the world. Yeah. So I'd like to just double click on the Deepa story from how you were able to, take a company from here and expand out, and any lessons learned from that experience.
We IPO'd in April 2008.
What timing, huh?
So yes, so right in the midst or at the beginning of the global financial crisis. We were very lucky to make it to market. So we listed on the LSE as a GDR as well as the NASDAQ to buy. And we had wonderful bankers as Brookfield, Morgan Stanley, UBS. So it was really, to your point, over $1 billion company. And the lessons learned in scaling that, if I look back, the first lesson was in 2005, we implemented a set of policies, procedures, governance. So it really was the systemization of the business. It's very difficult to scale if you don't have your systems and processes in place, because then everyone's just operating in the best way they see fit, rather than the best way that you as the founder see fit. So whereas implementing systems and governance can sometimes feel like you're giving away control, I actually think it's you're implementing controls. So that's important to scale. I think the other thing that we should not underestimate is the power of your client relationships. So many of the clients in the region also operated internationally, and working with them to scale globally was key. So finding out which relationships within your business, clients, suppliers, and so on, are global and collaborating, and opens those doors much more easily than just hiring someone in the market.
And how did you build the credibility? I mean, as a 20-something-year-old, also, being part of the family has also a mixed, bag of attached, a perception, right? That you're coming in, you flew in from the US, and here you are kind of leading. How did you manage the team and actually build the credibility within the organization?
So again, several things. I think the first thing I did was a lot of organizational restructuring, which the company had grown so quickly until then. It was very organic that it needed a little bit of restructuring. And I worked very closely with my father, with Deloitte, with a few people to bring that to being. And that set us up as 8 managing directors, 4 on the ops side and 4 on the non-ops side, each one really able to focus on their strengths. And then the CEO. And as one of the managing directors, the first thing I did was implement, monthly meetings between all the MDs of all the different parts of the world. So really from the ground up, building the credibility. But the Johari window, right? So you have the 4 boxes. You know what you know what you don't know, and then there's the you don't know what you don't know, and then you don't know what you know. And I think being able to step in and say, I don't know what I don't know. Here's what I know I don't know, and therefore I'm relying on everybody else. And here's what I know I know.
Yep.
And being able to say that and communicate that, then I think enables people to trust you when you say, here's what I know, because you're first able to say, there's a
all this
whole
stuff
part
I don't know. And I think honestly, that's rare for people who are early career, right? I remember when I was, one of my first jobs was a consultant, and you fly into the client site and you're supposed to be the person who knows everything, but obviously you've just graduated from college and have never really done anything. But it's part of the persona. And it's almost this insecurity as well of just being, always like, no, I have an opinion. I can, going in and actually, being very transparent about what you don't know can have that real impact of saying, okay, well, maybe this person's credible. And I think that's something that usually takes people longer to kind of get to.
Something I learned from my father. So, for him, it was governance, policies, processes, IPOs, don't know.
Interesting.
So he would turn to me and say, what is best practice here?
And asking your own child for help
Yes. And
is
so
actually
then
a powerful tool.
Yes, and so I could turn around and be like, here's the whole universe of things I don't know. This little bit, I kind of know. So that's really, so I learned from him that there is nothing wrong with having that humility to say, here's what I know I don't know. Yeah. And by the way, there's a whole other set of things I don't know that I don't even know.
And what elements of what you took from your family, or maybe your father in that case, are you trying to now kind of bestow on your children?
I think so much of it. So my father was someone who always had a very high level of integrity, work ethic, humility, and that showed up in the office day after day after day. And that informed the entire culture of 9,500 people. So even when we IPO'd, the equity he granted others was his personal equity, but he wanted to make sure that everyone had equity in the business. Everyone at Global Ventures has carry, down to kind of the receptionist. If we have an exit, everyone celebrates together, right? And that's the principle, is that it's really hard to do anything alone in life.
Yeah.
And recognizing that it's the people around you that enable you to move forward, and having the ability to share, and that gratitude for their time and their effort is something that's fundamental to life.
So what's next for you? I mean, have any other big plans coming forward?
I think the book is very, very exciting, putting that out there. Most parts of the world have had many books written. This will be one of the first on the MENA region. So that's wonderful. And then the podcast. So the podcast goes to show a lot of the global Arab success stories. So people originally from this part of the world. So Hala Gourani is a great example of that. Tony Fadell is a great example of that. Tony Fadell was the father of the iPod and the iPhone. Originally Lebanese, and grew into that and is now very successful. Built Nest, has several books. Incredible. Right? Hala Gourani from CNN. So people that are originally from the region and their journeys as they've built their own careers globally, but originally from here.
It's like the personal sort of side to the business Global Ventures. This is the personal Global Ventures, right? Interesting. And what do you hope to achieve with that?
I think really to inspire this next generation. We still have a fallacy where the ceiling for us is this part of the world. To your earlier point on copycats, to your earlier point on insecurities coming from this part of the world. And if we have all these success stories globally whose stories have rarely been told, right, as their personal journeys that people can share, the youth can look up and say, wow, if those people can do it and become the best in the world at what they do, so can I.
Wishing you all the best for that.
Thank you. Thank
Great.
you very
And so
much.
I'd love to wrap up with a quick fire round of questions.
Of course.
Exit early and lock in returns, or bet it all for a potential big win?
A mixture of both.
Cop out. True or false? AI will take the jobs of financial analysts.
Yes.
True. Stellar idea, average team, or stellar team, average idea?
Stellar team, average idea.
Pick one. Expand to Southeast Asia, India, or Sub-Saharan Africa?
It depends on the industry. But
these days, which of those markets are you feeling?
Southeast Asia.
Okay. Any reason?
I think India and Africa are great, but India's crowded and Africa is a bit early.
Great. Best tip to become a VC?
Build a company.
And the operator VC, especially in emerging markets, is more of a rare commodity.
Yes.
Now, bet on a global breakthrough tech or incremental innovation in a huge market?
Global breakthrough tech.
And the next big wave after AI?
Energy.
Great.
And you need it to power AI.
Thank you, Noor, for being with me on Money Moves.
Thank you, Mohammed, for having me.
So you heard Noor on what it takes to go global. I want to hear from you in the comments on any companies in your country that you think have the right ingredients to make it happen.